Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast, Wednesday edition, something, whatever we're going to talk about. So we didn't really, Unsustainable is done. So now we go over new stuff. And pretty much what has happened since the last time we recorded is the trade deadline. So we're going to go over the trade deadline. Brandon is still in New Hampshire. His video is a little choppy for some reason, so ignore him.
My internet hasn't been great, but what can you do?
Yeah, the audio still works. So maybe, don't look at his face and we're all good. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over the big trades, what they mean for those players, and on top of that, more so what they mean for the team as a whole, and also sort of take a look at just teams in general going into the playoffs and what the schedules look like, because some of them have much easier ones than others, while some have some good ones. And we did get news that Yahoo is officially not going to be extending leagues. So that means that, there's no...
8th is the deadline, I think.
8th is the deadline to end your seasons.
Yeah. They said they'll potentially look into it, but as of right now, they're not going to, which makes me think they're not going to.
Yeah, I don't think they will.
So that even means that Sunday, that is the beginning of the buffer period, isn't going to count either. And there are a handful of games that are scheduled in that already. So, yeah. There's a lot of games that are not going to count for fantasy.
It's crazy how many are not going to count. There's a lot. So let's go through the trades, I guess, and the teams as well, and how those were impacted as a result. So how about you just walk us through some of these trades?
I'm curious. I'm counting the games of how many are not going to be counted. And it is 10, 13.
And that's not assuming any more get moved.
15, yeah. 16, 17, 18. So far, there's 18 games.
Jeez.
So that's 36 starts per team, essentially.
That is nuts.
Not per team, but like total team starts that won't count in fantasy. Anyway, yeah. So going through the trade deadline and kind of the things that happened, I'm just going to walk through some of the bigger trades that happened, or at least the ones that are fantasy relevant. I think the first one that like sort of pops up on some people's radars is Eric Stahl moving to Montreal. I don't think he should be popping up on many radars. Like that's a really depth move. Even if you say he's playing on like the second line or something, which I think right now they have him slated as the fourth line, but honestly, like everything besides, in fact, all their lines are basically interchangeable.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really mean much. He just like, even if he plays well, he's just going to be another Montreal player. It's really hard for Montreal players, as we've said, like this whole season. It's hard to rely on Montreal players for consistent output because they're deployed so evenly. It's like nobody can be the guy, even if they're playing well.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen flashes of Nick Suzuki being really good. We've seen flashes of Tatar being really good. We've seen flashes of Deneau being really good. We've seen nobody be consistently good through the whole season except for like Jeff Petrie. So
who would have thought?
And like Toffoli, I guess, but yeah, right.
Petrie of all people being the one person that's good, just like never would have expected it.
Even Corey Perry's had a couple of good games.
Yeah,
I actually picked him up in a deep league.
It's weird.
Now he's on the quote unquote fourth line, so who knows?
It's weirdness.
But yeah, snap reaction like Eric Stahl. Like if he didn't matter before, I don't think he matters now.
Nope.
The next big one was the Islanders picking up Kyle Palmieri and Travis Zajac. There was a lot of buzz around this, and I've already talked about this a little bit on 10 Takes previously, but Palmieri moving to the Islanders doesn't really matter as much as you might think. Like, similarly to Montreal, they basically rolled their top three lines, not as quite as interchangeably, but it's not, even if he was top left wing, which he's not, by the way. I don't know how much it really matters. Like playing Barzal exposure is great, but there's no guarantee he's going to get it. And if he does get it, there's no guarantee he's going to keep it. We've already seen them shift that line around a couple of times. When he came over, they kept Zajac and Palmieri together, and now they've moved Zajac up to the top left wing, I think. So yeah, it's difficult to really be super bullish on Palmieri, especially because he's playing on a power play unit that also does not feature Barzal, which you'd want it to.
Yeah, I'm not that high on kind of I guess that Islanders offense in general, like you're saying. The interesting thing is that a lot of these places the trades happened, outside of maybe like the Hall trade and the Mantha trade, a lot of these teams are pretty evenly stacked in a way in the sense of where the points come from. The Isles are one. They're not an offensive powerhouse to begin with, and on top of that, I think they also roll lines a little bit more evenly at times. Not all the time. They'll have some games where Brazil's line skates the majority of the game, but for the most part, they tend to kind of manage their minutes pretty well, and the same as Montreal. But going into I think like the Hall trade and the Mantha trade, those are trades to me where it's good name players. The problem though there is just I don't think they're going to get the exposure that they need to be top players. They're very good teams, Washington and Boston, but ultimately Hall and Mantha were depth moves for both Boston and Washington, right? Like if you look at Hall, he really improves that second line, really improves the second power play, and that's how they're going to use him. He's not being brought in to be this new powerhouse that they have. They've already got that in Marchand, Bergeron, and Pasternak, so you don't need that. But what can you do? You can add a powerhouse to those second units, and I think that that's where Hall will mostly be. And because of that reason, his ceiling is really capped on Boston. It's similar to David Krejci, right? Krejci, when given the opportunity to be top line, top power play, we see him flourish. But anytime he's ever on that second line, second power play, like he usually is, there is a cap on how good David Krejci can be. And I think in very many ways, we're going to see the same thing from Hall. And in that same vein, Mantha. Mantha's the same thing. Second, third line guy, second power play. Sure, great player, but he's not there to be the guy. And that's actually something that I'm going to be curious to see how Mantha does. I know we've heard in the past talks of his attitude. So I'm very curious to see if that's just because he was on a losing team and if that changes now in Washington or if he improves that. But I am not super high. I know a lot of people rushed to pick up Mantha. He got a goal last night. But even then, I am a little bit cautious on Mantha.
Assist.
And an assist. Yeah. I'm a little bit cautious still on Mantha, personally.
Yeah, I'm the same. With regards to Hall, I think he should be better than he was in Buffalo.
Yeah.
But, I'm just saying I don't think that we should be. I would agree that we shouldn't expect him to be what we thought he was going to be at the beginning of the season. Even like we kind of hoped that we were going to see some return to form with him leaving Arizona. It didn't happen in Buffalo. I really don't see it happening in Boston, despite Boston being a far superior team. And I think the main reason is that he's not going to be power play one. And he could slide in there, but like the person he's most likely to take out is Nick Ritchie, and he's not going to play the style that Ritchie does. Like Nick Ritchie's not on the top power play because he has a great shot or a good pass or whatever. He's on there to be a big body net front presence, and that is not what Hall is.
Yep.
So let's assume he can't replace Ritchie. Then who does he take out? All right, Pasternak? No. Does he take out Marchand? No. Bergeron? No. Does he take out Mike Riley? Do they go 5 forwards? That's possible. And it is, it's not impossible that they do swap him for Nick Ritchie. We saw that briefly where they were playing Krejci in place of Ritchie for a little bit, but honestly, we didn't see much of that.
Yeah.
Ritchie has pretty much been power play one the whole season with like very minor exceptions.
It's those butt goals per 60.
Butt goals per 60 for sure. So I think we'll see a better Hall, but I don't think we're going to see like a great Hall or anything.
Yeah,
I don't think it's like, you shouldn't be super excited. Like maybe if I was a Hall holder, which I am not at this point anyway, if I saw that trade, I'd kind of be like, this could be good if somehow he makes it on power play one. And as soon as he didn't, I'd be like, oh. And then that was kind of it.
And when you consider,
I think that
when you consider the people that are second line, right? Normally they're not worth picking up. Like almost always they're on the wire. Krejci and all those, they're usually streamer guys. So I think that there is a possibility that Hall is really just a streamer value on Boston. And I'm not saying that because Hall's not good. It's just the situation. You look at everybody that's ever been on a non-Boston top line, and they end up just being waiver fodder, honestly, until they get hot. Now, could he have a stretch where he gets really hot, like Krejci or Craig Smith right now? Sure. But those are pretty rare in Boston.
Yeah. The other one that I think, so we already touched on Mantha, and I basically agree that the other one that was brought up a lot is Vrana, who, you'd expect to have seen kind of better deployment from him than at least is expected. He's skating power play 2, which is absurd to me, but it is wild. What it is, I guess. And he's also not top line last time I saw. I didn't check any tweets today, but that's what I understand, that he's also not top line. I'm surprised, to be honest.
Same.
I think, like, why not give him Larkin time? And if he did get Larkin time and he did get power play one, there's potential, but it's still Detroit, and it's still going to be hard for him to really do well there. I mean, we saw him get some opportunities this season when there was, COVID stuff going on in Washington, and he, spent some time being kind of the best player that they had from an offensive perspective, and it didn't really pan out, or at least an expected offensive perspective. I think a lot of people talk about his point production per 60, and we expected to see that go up with increased ice time. I certainly did, and it didn't really happen. I mean, not the longest. We didn't get to see it for very long, but it still wasn't very encouraging that didn't happen. The one player that I think did get an increase here is Mike Riley.
Yes,
Mike Riley playing power play one is actually a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
He was playing pretty well in Ottawa. I think that he will continue to play pretty well in Boston. I don't know what happens when Grzelcyk comes back. I don't think that Grzelcyk was necessarily being used as the power play one defenseman because he's amazing. I think it just was a handedness issue, and he has an offensive mindset. And if Mike Riley has a better offensive mindset, or they decide he's running that power play better, it could be the end for Grzelcyk, essentially. If he comes back healthy and is not immediately on power play one, he's an insta drop.
Yeah.
So, and actually, I don't know if it's quite exactly the same for the other direction, but it probably is. Like, if he comes back and Mike Riley's not power play one, he's probably dropped too.
Yeah, for sure. I think both of them are exactly. Whoever is not top power play is not worth it.
Yeah.
The other person to talk about briefly is Jeff Carter. A lot of people obviously saying he's washed up and he's old, which I get, but he is centering the second line in Pittsburgh and currently on the second power play. Another one of those guys, I think, where just maybe at some point could get the opportunity and get a shot. But I think with Carter especially, I mean, no Malkin hurts him.
Yeah.
Because as soon as Malkin comes back, I would assume Malkin slots into that second C, and then they move Jeff Carter down to the third center. So I would say that anything right now from Jeff Carter is short-lived, although I do think that there is a chance that maybe now they can run that second line for a bit more time than they were before, because they might trust Carter a little bit more. Still, though, this was such a boring trade deadline for fantasy because everyone that got traded was mostly just depth pieces. There were no big moves. There was nothing that really shook any teams up. Strangely enough, like you said, I think Vrana is the most exciting one. It's the only one that could, at some point in this next few weeks, really take over that top power play or top line position and kind of get a chance to run with it. But everyone else is pretty much locked into a depth role, and there's just not a lot to take advantage of there.
Well, I'm semi-holding my breath for Mantha. I could see him potentially weaseling his way into power play one. We saw Vrana play power play one a little bit. If they decide to move one of Kuznetsov or Backstrom off that power play, he could potentially be there.
Potentially.
And if he does, I do like the line that he's on. With I think they're playing with Oshie because they moved Tom Wilson back up top line, if memory serves. So they're playing with Oshie and Backstrom. That's a pretty solid second line.
It's a good 5-on-5 line.
But yeah, the top power play of Backstrom, Oshie, Kuznetsov, we've seen Kuznetsov move off of that top power play for Vrana, actually, to, kind of middling effects.
Yeah.
But I could see that happening with Mantha. But again, this is if you're making, this is not the time of the year to be trying, making these types of assumptions.
No.
That's a move you want to be looking at, the first few weeks of the season where you're like, I will hang on to this guy, even if he's slightly below replacement level, because something might happen.
Yeah.
I don't think I would do that in the playoffs.
Yeah. Right now in the playoffs, you're looking for highest upside, and these guys just don't give you that upside.
Yeah. Although I would like to touch on a little bit, the implications for other players. And actually for most of these trades, you look at Mantha and Vrana, they basically they just swapped into each other's positions. Even they didn't Vrana is where Mantha was, and Mantha is now where Vrana was. There's nothing really going on there. So nobody on the rest of the team got affected by that. I think with Carter coming over, people were really worried about McCann. McCann also was not affected. It looks like he's going to keep his top power play, and he's earned it. So, and I think he was centering, so now he's going to be winging that second line, which is actually probably better for him. I think in a vacuum, it seems like
Agreed.
When centers move to the wing, they tend to do a bit better in general. And then for Carter, he's a guy I've held in one of my leagues for the entire season, but it's because he's a very consistent, 2 to 3 shots a game, 1 hit a game, whatever points guy. So he just kind of I wasn't really looking for any points, but when I get them, I'm happy about it. And he just kind of is my 3 shot a game, hit a game type player in a deep league. So that was my like. I have him in a couple of leagues now, but I didn't. Him moving to Pittsburgh, I kind of was like, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't really do anything to me.
In my not my keeper league, but in my points league, I actually picked up both Rasmus Dahlin and Ristolainen. So that one's going to be interesting. I like that they're both on the top power play, both getting a lot of minutes now. It seems like Granato is playing them a lot better. Although I will say that I'm not very hyped on Buffalo playing Boston 6 of the next 7 games, so the next 2 weeks. That is not going to be great. So I'm a little worried about that. So, yeah, it's not great. There's not a lot that helps Buffalo there.
Yeah. And the other one, that Taylor Hall moving actually affects Nick Ritchie in a pretty negative way.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, because Nick Ritchie, despite staying power play 1, is now going to be third line, and that is not a super interesting third line, unfortunately. I don't really see. The funny thing is, I'm still kind of holding on to him for the time being, just because he has a decent schedule this week, and we've already mentioned kind of how often they're going to play Buffalo, but so there's that, but I'm not. I'm upset. I'm upset to be a Nick Ritchie holder at this point, because Nick Ritchie, Charlie Coyle, and Jake DeBrusk is not a line that I love. But
truly is not. And then we also got news of injuries. So Eichel is out for the season, which maybe gives Middlestat a little bit of a chance, actually. I know that, like, just a weird one. Definitely, like, Middlestat is someone that's slightly interesting now that they have a new coach, and they seem to be giving him more chances. There's a guy like Sam Reinhart who really needs to step up. And I'm looking up Buffalo's lines because I want to make sure that I get these right.
Tage Thompson, I've actually mentioned as interesting in general. Like
so Tage
seems to be the one that's doing decently well so far.
So right now the top line has been, although pretty even with the Skinner, Reinhardt, Olofsson line, right now the top line has been Tage Thompson, Casey Middlestat, and Asplund. But if you look at the power play, what's interesting there is that it's actually Reinhardt, Middlestat, and Olofsson on that top power play, and then they're running both Dahlin and Risto on the top power play. So Casey Middlestat is going to get pretty interesting here soon, if they can actually get him going. He has the expectations on the pedigree from the past, and in the playoffs, maybe this is a bad strategy, but it's worked out for me in the past. Is I really do like in the playoffs targeting bad teams sometimes, because you can find better opportunities than you will elsewhere. Like, instead of gambling on a second power play, second line guy in Boston, not pointing out Hall, but I'm talking about like maybe Craig Smith or something, I'd rather gamble on a guy like Bunting, who's getting a lot of minutes in top power play. A guy like Middlestat, who's getting good minutes in top power play. They're just gambles where you're betting on minutes turning into production. You don't need a lot of production, but it turns into something.
Right. Yeah, I see where you're going with that. As far as the trades, like you mentioned, there wasn't. I mean, the closest thing you could call to like a quote unquote blockbuster is Taylor Hall moving, but
yeah.
I mean, you got to realize that's not quite a blockbuster, given the fact that they didn't even get first for him. Yeah. So, yeah, there wasn't anything too crazy that happened.
I'm also not touching Devin Dubnyk.
Oh yeah, no,
don't care about Dubnyk. I don't even care that he's on Colorado.
No. In fact, you can make the argument that it's worse because he's going to get less starts, I would imagine.
Yeah,
like despite Colorado trading for him, I don't think they really want to play him if they can avoid it.
They definitely don't.
Okay, so for the rest of this, we're going to talk about kind of teams and schedules and what you should be looking for the rest of the season. But bear in mind that this varies based on your leagues. Like I mentioned that a lot of my leagues are in playoffs right now. They started this week and they're going to end May 2nd. Most of your leagues, I would assume, are ending May 8th, which was the end of the regular season. I don't think, I could be wrong about Fantrax here, but I don't think any of the providers are allowing an extension to the overflow week. So into like May 16th, for example, is like the last day that we have scheduled regular season games at this point. It looks like Gammy mentioned earlier, that Yahoo has already said they do not intend to extend past May 8th, which was the regular season end on paper. My Fantrax league is actually, both of them are also ending May 8th. So actually, let me double check that my other one is ending May 8th. I'm pretty sure it is. But that that invalidates a lot of games, and it's a big deal because you need to look at the teams that are being affected by that. Um, oh yeah, my one Fantrax league also ends on the second, so my leagues are all running up soon. Um, but yeah, I mean, the unsurprisingly, the team that has the most games in that final overflow week is Vancouver with 5, which is just insane. But also not terribly surprising given how many they've missed so far. So as far as their like actual schedule in the playoffs, they're not that bad apart from this week.
Yeah.
They have in fact they're pretty good. If you were, savvy enough to go ahead and grab, JT Miller or Brock Besser or Bo Horvat or any of these guys that got dropped during the COVID scare and the run up to playoffs, you're probably in good shape right now. I actually, unfortunately, missed out on JT Miller by like literally a matter of minutes, which is part of the reason I don't like same day ad leagues. Although that's a totally different discussion. But it's your own fault at that point.
Yeah.
Wake up at 3.
I mean, I've been holding JT Miller and Quinn Hughes through this whole thing in my points league, so I'm excited for them to be back.
Yeah.
But
I've held Horvat, and I blew all my free agent budget on Besser in one of the leagues.
Smart. Yeah, I have a few of those guys, and I'm excited for them to finally be playing. And I'm really hoping there's no more COVID situations because that would really screw us in the playoffs if that
we'll
happens.
See.
Man,
we are recording this Wednesday, and we already had a positive
Scare.
test on Colorado yesterday, which is their second in a week or so.
That'd be brutal if Colorado. If
I think the first one was
shut down.
I think the first one was a false positive, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, so one team that stands out to me that I don't really love the schedule of immediately is obviously Buffalo, who plays Boston so much. Although, like I said, I do like kind of that opportunity for Casey Middlestat and have still Risto and Dahlin. It's still just not great because it's against Boston. That being said, if Tuukka's not back, and then there's going to be some interesting decisions there from Boston because we've seen their backup goaltenders or third and fourth string goaltenders are just kind of okay. They're not great, so you can score goals on them. And then I also don't really like Columbus's schedule. They do have a 2-game week in there, so it kind of makes me like, the Bjorkstrands, the Patrick Laine's, those guys a lot less. So I don't think that I already dropped Bjorkstrand. I dropped Laine. I don't think that there is much reason really to hold on there.
What I will say in general, the final week, so this is part of the reason, this is awkward because usually it's not this bad, but the final week of the season is going to be extremely difficult on your bench.
Yeah.
Monday has 14 games.
Jeez.
So that's a ton of games being played. That's definite bench issues.
What day is that?
Wednesday's okay. That's May 3rd.
Okay.
So my leagues, almost all of them end on May 2nd, so I don't really have to run into this so much.
Yeah.
And the weeks prior to that are not nearly as bad, except for Saturday, May 1st, which has as many games as is possible to be played, which is 15. But so May 3rd and then also May 8th is also 14 games. So that last week, you don't have a Sunday anyway because the regular season ends on that Saturday. So you're looking at a 6-game week or 6-day week with 2 of the days being extremely heavy. So I think if you are playing that final week, you should be, the stronger you feel about your team, the more you should be looking at optimizing for that week because it is going to be really tough on your bench. And there's ways to do it. Like there's enough off nights that you can probably move guys around midweek to kind of optimize. So you may not have to optimize now. You just need to be paying attention to it. Yeah. And by the way, if you're looking, the best resource, and I don't think this is like a hot take, this is pretty much standard at this point for this stuff, is to go to zerogamesabovereplacement.com. Yeah. That is actually my cousin's site. He wrote this tool originally. He wrote the original tool that was hosted on the Fantasy Hockey Podcast website. He spun it off into his own site. If you haven't been using it yet, like it's
a godsend.
My number one most used tool by such a wide margin. Yeah. And there's other tools here, but I think like the most the one with the most utility is the schedule just in general.
Yeah.
And the fact of how easy it is to see what an off night looks like, and it updates automatically as games are postponed or moved or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's always up to date. It's fantastic. And if you've been using it or it helps you in your playoffs or whatever, If you scroll down to the bottom, tap that buy me a coffee and give him a little donation. He's done
Yep.
this all pro bono. He does this
Yeah.
for fun, and he has built the best tool for optimizing fantasy, in my opinion,
Yeah.
that there is.
It saved us. And if you missed that, go to fantasyhockeypodcast.com/tools. And on there, it's the one that's called the off night tool. You click on that and it'll take you to the site that Renee built. It's so amazing. I use it literally every week. But that's going to be the biggest thing going forward now. Now it's less about, opportunities matter, but a lot of it is also going to be schedule now. I think when you go into the playoffs, scheduling matters more than anything. If you can get 6 starts on your opponent, that is massive. So, I think that I just took a look, for example, at that last week for me, and yeah, I'm benching so much on Monday and that Saturday. So I'm gonna have to make some moves there. Like you can take a look forward and see what I would do too. For example, is if you're going into these playoffs, is start looking at your next 3 weeks. Look at who is getting benched more often than not. If you find yourself benching a guy that even though you like, for example, say you like Bunting, but Bunting happens to be benched every time that you have an off night or that you have a heavy day, there is no reason for you to be keeping Bunting. You've got to plan ahead and say, okay, fine, I'm not going to have Bunting. Can I find an equally good player on someone who's actually going to get me starts and get ahead of that? So that's something you really got to do to help you in your playoffs. It's not about necessarily just reacting to the week that's coming. You really want to look ahead and find, because that'll sometimes open up roster spots. Because a lot of times you'll look at the next week and you'll say, oh man, I have no roster spots for this next week because I like all my players on my team. But if you look forward, 2-3 weeks, you'll see, oh, this player that I really like that I'm holding on to, is he going to do anything for me if I get past this round? And you can replace him for someone equally as good. And so I think that's, for me at least, probably the best advice going into the playoffs is don't just make your decisions on who to drop based on who's good now or who's bad now. Look ahead and see who's not going to be useful to you in the next week or two, because that'll make all the difference.
Yep. Yeah. Also, similar on the note of scheduling in general, there's not very many teams that have 2-game weeks, but they're going to be important going to playoffs because only having two games from a certain team is pretty detrimental. Next week is the one with the most of these cases, with Anaheim, Edmonton, and Washington all having 2-game weeks. Anaheim's is really spread out, so it makes it kind of difficult to react to. But honestly, there's not a lot of players on Anaheim that you need to be having as a long-term hold anyway, if any. So if you need to make that drop, make that drop. In fact, you probably should be making that drop and just getting ahead of it. The Caps is a different story, and you're only going to get them Thursday and Saturday, which are terrible nights. So not terrible, but they are on nights. The week after that, there's Columbus is the only one with 2-game slate, and they have that big spread out one as well. So you can't do something like play them twice early in the week and drop. So we already mentioned that Colorado has one of the worst schedules in our opinion. So dropping Colorado player,
not Colorado.
Columbus players into that week is a good idea, despite the fact that they have a good following week after that.
Yeah.
I don't think these guys are really that hot. Anybody on that team is really that hot, except for maybe really anybody on that team.
Nobody
is that hot to be holding on to over a 2-game stretch. And then the final week, we've got Detroit and Florida. Just kind of Detroit, luckily, doesn't really affect anybody. You can drop again, just about everybody on that team.
Florida,
hurts. That's the tough one. People with Barkov and Huberdeau, that's a rough last week to have. Yeah. So, but again, that's the week that ends May 8th. That may not be part of your league in general. Mm-hmm. So just be cognizant of what you need to do here, and that's why I'm saying use this tool. We can only explain so well about what's going on with these schedules, but it really applies differently to each league. Yep. So make sure that you're optimizing for your own league.
Yeah. And there you go. That's kind of our tips for the playoffs. I think it's kind of what it turned into. We honestly kind of went into this just rambling a little bit, but I think it's kind of what turned into is here's some playoff tips on how to schedule to the best of your ability going forward. We've got 3 weeks here left. There's not a lot of time left. So keep an eye out. I think we'll probably still do 10 takes this weekend, I think.
Yep.
So we'll still do 10 takes, give you our weekend pickup suggestions, and then moving into next week, it might just be 1 or 2 episodes a week to really help those of you that are in the playoffs. Maybe we'll do a live stream at some point to help people in the playoffs and just answer some questions. But otherwise, thank you so much for listening, and best of luck here in the home stretch in your playoffs.
Yep. Thanks for listening.